Good afternoon and welcome to the NSF Career Previous Awardees panel. Thank you for joining us for our first remote version of this panel. Today's session will be moderated by Dr. Ravi Prakash, himself a previous NSF Career recipient. Dr. Prakash is also a professor in the Department of Computer Science with interest in wireless networking, sensor networking, mobile computing, and distributed algorithms. We will be recording the webinar and making it available at a later date. And I now turn it over to Dr. Prakash to introduce our panelists and start the discussion.
Thank you, Emily, and welcome to this session. As Emily said, I got this award several decades back, so I guess the information that I may even venture to offer you may be terribly out of date. And I will rely on our very illustrious panel of three very recent awardees of the NSF Career Panel, who will, I'm pretty sure, provide some very useful ideas and suggestions so that I hope all of you will benefit. So without wasting anybody's time, let's go on to introduction. So it is my pleasure to have three very recent awardees drawn from three different departments to share their insights and experiences with the NSF career uh, process. And with me, I have a dear friend and colleague, Kyle Fox, from my own department, computer science. Kyle came to UTD in 2017 fall, and he got his NSF Career Award earlier this year. Congratulations, Kyle. And Kyle's work primarily is in theoretical computer science, and his award is on developing a better understanding of a mathematical field of topology so that it can be used to design efficient graph algorithms. And then we have Faruck Morcos, who is an assistant professor in biological sciences and also has an affiliated appointment in the Department of Bioengineering. And is also a member of the Center for Systems Biology. And Faruck came to UTD in fall of 2015. And after a postdoctoral stint at UCSD and Rice University. And his NSF Career Award was in 2019. And his work has been on developing methods to extract biological information from sequences and genomic data, and so that we can create better molecular evolution models for molecular evolution, protein structure and function, as well as biomolecular interactions. And then we have, last but not least, Yifei Lou, who has been the longest at UTD among our three panelists. She came to UTD in 2014 after receiving a PhD in applied math from UCLA, and then had a stint as a postdoctoral fellow at Georgia Tech in ECE, Electrical and Computer Engineering, followed by a stint at UC Irvine from 2012 to 14, just before joining UTD. And her NSF Career Award was in 2019. And her research is in compressive sensing and its applications, image analysis, and non-convex optimization algorithms. So as you can see, we have three people from three very different fields. But when it comes to scholarship and excellence in scholarship and the ability to identify problems that are important, and furthermore, to articulate those problems in a way that are especially appealing to reviewers, is a skill that I feel is broadly shared among all our panelists. So it is that not just the ability to identify problems, but to skillfully communicate the intellectual merit and its applications in that field as well as in the broader field of science is what I hope to hear from all the panelists. And I'm pretty sure what they have to offer will be of benefit to all of you as well. So what I'm planning to do is go one by one with each of these panelists and have them talk. And then I'm pretty sure all of you will have very interesting questions as well. So once we've had the panelists talk a little bit, then we'll come to your questions, and I will try to pose as many questions as we can in the 90 minutes that we have. All right, so Kyle, if you don't mind, let's start with you. So the first question that I would like to ask you is, what was the best and the worst part of the career application process? And if you've participated in any review process, then feel free to share that information as well.
Sure. So I think the best part of the process for the career in particular was actually working with UT Dallas's Office of Sponsored Projects. So I let them know about a month ahead of time that I was planning to apply for the Career Award. My grant specialist, I think, was Daniel Lisberger. And then I just went silent because I was busy working on the proposal. And a couple of weeks before the award was due, I got a follow-up email saying, hey, are you still planning to apply? We had a lot of back and forth emails, making sure that I was accessing research.gov correctly and that everything was running smoothly and that the budget was working out and that all the information was there, all the I's dotted, the T's crossed, and everything was perfect. And almost all the administrative stuff I did not have to worry about, which was very nice. Since you brought up serving on panels, or doing review process, I served on a panel a few months prior, and I think that was another very useful, beneficial thing to do, because I got to talk with my colleagues from all over the country and get an idea of what they found interesting, what they looked for in a good proposal, and a better idea of how the whole process worked, from sending the proposal in to getting the reviews done within the panel to panel discussions and how the decisions are ultimately made. So I'll probably reiterate this again later, but one piece of advice I have is, if at all possible, try to serve on an NSF review panel before you submit your career proposal, just so you have a good understanding of how the whole process works. It won't be a career panel, so it won't be a perfect understanding, but you'll at least understand the basic idea. Now, my worst experience, I think, was probably the time frames involved, which goes back to the panels and reviewing. You should be prepared to wait quite a while before you understand whether you're getting funded, what you can do with the information you put into your proposal, because it's going to be a few months before the panels meet and do their reviews. They're going to make their recommendations to the program director. They are going to possibly rank proposals to say what they find most interesting to least interesting and what should be funded. But the program director ultimately makes the decisions, and they're going to take another few months to make their decisions. Now, if you're lucky, you'll hear back in December. If you're a little less lucky, you'll hear back in January about whether you're getting funding. And in the meantime, you've missed the submission window for the core programs. So I hope you didn't want to take what you wrote in the career and turn it around to a core program submission. If you're very, very unlucky, you'll have an experience like I had with a previous submission where it took almost 9 months to hear back, because I was right on the borderline between funding and not funding, and they were scrounging around looking for extra money, which ultimately they didn't find. So you should be prepared for a long wait, especially if you have to make multiple attempts. But I'd say that's my worst experience. And then I'll have more specific advice probably when later during the panel.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. I think that's a very important message that you had, in terms of we all fall in love with our own proposals. So attending other review panels and seeing how people who haven't seen our own proposal react to our proposals is very important insight, right? Because you have to be able to see it from the eyes of the reviewer. And then I'll actually top you on your story. My first career proposal review took almost a year, and I got rejected. So I submitted in 99. 15 days before the next submission was due, I was told that I wouldn't be getting it. So, but the second time around, I was lucky enough to get it. So yeah, those are war stories that we can exchange, of course. So Faruck, I guess I'll ask you the same question, your best and worst experiences in the whole process.
Yeah, thanks, Ravi. Good to be here. Well, to me, it was slightly different from the point of view of what I kind of got out of the process, because I was fairly, as a kind of young new faculty, I was all focused completely on research, right? So what are the important research problems, how I can solve them, what kind of papers I'm writing. But then I realized that the career proposals really value the broader impact component. And I really enjoyed the fact that we could learn about how we can share our science, and then how we can maybe disseminate science to other kind of age groups. And that's a part that I thought was very satisfying, because you really have to think hard, and then you really need to find ways to do it. So to me, that was formative. Let's call it this way. Originally, I guess many years ago, that's what I got from mentors. That part was less relevant as it is now. So obviously, it was always important, but it was more like a supplement. While now it is a core part of the career versus other proposals. So that part I really enjoy, being able to kind of think new ideas and then incorporate other audiences as I was not used to. The let's say worst experience I had, or at least the hard part of this whole process, as you can imagine, is dealing with rejection, right? So you submit, you spend a lot of time, you read all that you can read, and then ultimately you don't get it, right? I guess that's something that everyone should expect. But probably to me, the hard issue was trying to learn from the reviewer comments, because sometimes it's really hard to actually transform the comments into action, right? Either because sometimes maybe the reviewer might not be too let's say knowledgeable of what you're doing, which means that probably you were not clear enough. But sometimes their comments, just show that, and it's hard to act other than let's be more clear. But sometimes actually the hard part is I actually happen to have really good comments, but I didn't get funded. So that was a little bit frustrating. Sometimes, like the first times, I would get really nice comments, good scores, and then suddenly it was not recommended. It was encouraging, but it was also kind of frustrating, because it was hard to learn from those.
Thank you, Faruck. I think, yeah, meaning rejection is the part of life, and it's not just in academia, but pretty much every field, right? Whether in any creative field, there will be lots of rejections, and usually there are many more rejections than acceptances or approvals, whether it is papers or proposals. Meaning, we've all been in panels where we may have had proposals coming from people whom we have perhaps admired or idolized as grad students, and we've seen the panels where we've been rejecting some of those proposals from people. So there's nothing to be disappointed of, right? As long as we can hopefully learn. And of course, there's always this risk that we may dismiss a comment saying, this person simply did not understand. My idea was so good. What more could I have written? But there's usually something that we can always do. So I guess a fair amount of modesty while reviewing the comments and feedback would go a long way. Also, I agree with you that from the time that I was writing my career proposal to the time now when I'm writing regular proposals, the importance of broader impact, the importance of data management plan, data dissemination has significantly increased. Previously, it used to be an afterthought. People would just write boilerplate statements and that would suffice. Now, panels come down really hard if they feel that the PI did not pay sufficient attention to that. And sometimes if your proposal is on the bubble and it's between two proposals, the program manager might go in favor of a proposal that may have a better data dissemination and broader impact plan. So yeah, these are things that we should ignore only at our peril. We should, right? These are just as important. So Yifei, now coming to you, the same question, but I will maybe double up and ask you the second question as well at the same time. And Faruck and Kyle, I'll come back to you with those questions as well. So Yifei, the question is, once again, what is the worst part and the best part for the career review and application and the review process? And then, of course, now that you've already got your proposals funded, and what do you think you wish you had known then, but now you know? So what would you have, how would you have used this experience, or in hindsight, what could you have done better or different?
So I prepare a few slides. Can everyone see my slide?
Sure,
let
yes,
me do a
yes.
presenter mode. So I will answer those questions later, but so let me just follow my slide. If anything unclear, I guess you can ask me later or from the audience. So let me first prepare one slide about myself, especially those timelines. So I joined UTD in 2014, and I got a regular NSF grant in the next year. Right after I got a regular, I immediately submit a career, which I think is a bad decision, but I just want to give a try, right? So, but yeah, as I can expect it failed. I didn't get it. So 2 years later, I submit second time's career, and I got awarded. After I got awarded, so actually I want to comment Faruck's comment that, oh, maybe it's Kyle. Anyway, so my regular NSF grant is due in December. So right around mid-November, I got email from program officer saying that we intend to recommend your grant, so do not submit to regular. So that's a pretty good news to me, and what a relief, right? So after the next year, so although my career is awarded in 2019, and on the same year I served on the panel, and then this year, which is a month ago, I also served on a panel. So I have some experience on serving a panel. Of course, this year it will be a Zoom meeting, right? But anyway, so that's my experience regarding a career. Oh, by the way, for my panel, I'm not serving on career. I'm serving for a regular NSF grant. Here is some review criteria that you can find in any of the call for proposal place. So I want to highlight some important key points which serves a good or bad practice when you want to write a proposal. So we all know that NSF value intellectual merits and broader impacts. But on the same time, they also want to see creative, original, and transformative concepts. So you want to highlight in your proposal that what are the novelties of your proposal compared to the literature. And also they want to see if your research plan is well organized, or whether you have some mechanism to evaluate whether your project is successful or not. They also want to see how well qualified of you or of your team, so that you can successfully conduct the proposed activity. And then lastly, they also want to see those resources that are available to you. For example, you have to write a facility management plan or data plan to explain what are the resources that are available to you. So based on this information, so I want to summarize some good and bad practice that I either encounter myself or I see it in the review process. So because the NSF want to see transformative ideas, so you want to clearly state what is your research goal objectives of your proposal. So it can be a very high level or big picture, but you also want to give some intermediate stepping stones. For example, I guess nowadays everyone is trying to solve the coronavirus, right? So it's a big picture there. But you want to say what specific steps you want to analyze to lead you to solve the coronavirus. So you want to analyze some data, you want to analyze how it gets to the United States, something like that. So you need to have a feasible plan, okay? And then, so for preliminary results, I would say you don't want to write too much, or you don't want to less. So if you write too much, so I did see a proposal with 12 pages preliminary results, only 1 page or 2 talk about the proposed work. I think my concern is if you already have 12 pages preliminary, your idea is almost done, right? Why do you need funding to keep working? And then you don't want to have too less. So if you don't have enough preliminary people will question whether you have the ability to conduct your research. So you want to show you have some collaboration history, so or your track records that you might be successful in the research that you're trying to conduct. And then I think you want to emphasize your motivation, novelties, contributions, impacts. So those are the keywords that, at least for me as a reviewer, I try to look through those proposals, try to write something about the strengths of your proposal. And then so as a NSF want to see how well organized your research plan is. You may want to give out a timeline. And also NSF like to see students' involvement. So NSF like to support students, not yourself, right? So you want to see in this research plan, what are the students' role to doing what type of jobs. Finally, I think the assessment is optional, but it's really good to be there. So in my first rejected proposal, I don't have any assessment. And I got comment that so this project needs to have a coordinated assessment plan. So I added and I got awarded. So I think if you can have it, it's good to be there. And also the plan B means that so your proposal is just hypothesis. You cannot guarantee everything you propose there will be successful. So you want to say that if my idea is not successful, how can I make for it? So what do I have a plan B to well spend on this 5-year program, right? So those are the good things I want to see in a proposal. So the back part, so I will separate in two things. One is the intellectual merit, the other is broader impacts. So those are the comments. Again, as I said, it's either see from my own review or I got from when I was a panel. So if you see the proposed work is incremental, not transformative, or natural extension from previous work, it pretty much kills a proposal. So that's why I want to emphasize the novelty, the contributions, right, the impact, so that they will not write the sentence for your review. And then sometimes they will say some descriptions lacks of clarity. So the review panel is interdisciplinary. So you don't know who are in the review panel. So you want to make sure your description can be understood by layman, right? So you want to not too much technical words. That's what I'm trying to say. And then the third comment is more details will have strengthened the proposal. So I see those comments a lot when we have the panel discussion. So you want to add some detail to clearly explain what you're trying to propose. And the last one I see recently that there's one proposal, it failed to recognize a large literature on a related field, which immediately got rejected. Okay, so at first the rating is pretty good, but after one panelist point out to this literature, this proposal is immediately ranking very, very low. So that is the practice for intellectual merits. And then for border impacts, I often see nothing is too remarkable about border impacts. So in my opinion, intellectual merits will make you, so it will make your proposal rank higher or lower. But if we have the proposal around the same ranking, then the broader impact will make your proposal stand out. So you want to make something remarkable about your broader impact. So remarkable, as opposite to remarkable, it's standard, right? So I want to say student supervision is standard. As a professor in research university, you have to supervise some students. So I would say mentioning about student supervision is somehow unnecessary. But you do want to mention some important, the novelty part, which maybe you want to help students to get in some internship, or maybe you want to give some interdisciplinary training to students. Those things are pretty new. You need to be creative. And also, I'll see comments about, I want to teach this class based on my research. Well, I will say that teaching is your job. You have to teach anyway, right? So, but develop a curriculum for a new course or writing a textbook could be viewed as a strength of your broader impacts. And I also see people say, I want to reach out to underrepresented groups, but how to reach, you want to specify, right? So everyone wants to reach out, but how? Do you have the resources to reach out to those groups? It's questionable. so right now, we all know what if we want to deal with data, if we have codes, it's pretty common to share codes, but it's helpful just to mention it, because I see people saying that if they plan to share code, it has some border impact. So I just want to point out that you may want to mention code sharing. Okay. Other materials, we have the data management plan and then the collaboration ladder. So usually for data management plan, we only have adequate, or pretty much every data management plan is adequate. But I do see a proposal with 2-sentence data management plan is considered as weak by one reviewer. So you don't want to be too, you don't want to pay much attention on the data management plan, but you don't want to be too loose about it. And if you want to do data-driven researches, you want to mention how do you want to store data, how the data is coming from, how to share your data. So those things, the reviewer will take a look. So for collaboration ladder, I would say it's not a must, and it doesn't hurt to get letter from collaborators. So so it shows your collaboration history or the commitment from your collaborator. And then I do have a comments in my proposal saying that the department head letter is supportive. So I would say that try to talk to your department head, make sure her letter is very supportive of your career and it aligns with your department goals or ambitions, something like that. So I want to mention some UTD resources. I pretty much use all of them, so I want to share my experience. So regarding the underrepresented minorities, UTD has a diversity scholarship. So this scholarship will give money to those underrepresented minorities. So you can say that you want to pair with this program to reach out to underrepresented minorities. And then the second one is called UTeach program. It sits in Science Mathematical Education Department. So this program is to train secondary teachers in high school or middle school. So by pairing with them, you can say I can reach out to K-12 education. Okay. And then I don't know if anyone knows, UTD has a repository of winning proposals. So it's not just career, it's for regular proposals or workshop, and it's not just NSF, NIH or DAPA, they have a lot of winning examples for you to take a look. So I think it's very helpful. And finally, when I first came to UTD, I was running around in various grant writing workshops, which I found very helpful. And also OSP provide editing service to check your proposal. So I'm not a native speaker, so my language, right, may have some problem. So I always rely on them to check my languages, which I found very helpful. Finally, I have some advice. So I would say ask someone to read your proposal to give you some additional lines of information. It can be someone from your field or someone in your department. Right, make sure it's not just your, so that it can be understood by various background. And then, so I want to emphasize novelties and impacts, which are very important for a proposal to be awarded. I think it's okay to repeat with paraphrasing, meaning that, so for novelties, you may want to put in the introduction, when you describe your research, you will want to say the research has novelties of blah, 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 right? And then maybe in the intellectual merits, you want to repeat those novelties. So for those things, it's okay to repeat because the reviewer will not have to read your whole proposals. So you want to make sure you put as much as you can, right? So make sure they read those things. Yeah, don't be afraid of rejections. We discussed from Focus, right? I got rejected the first time and I was awarded the second time. So don't be afraid. Just look at the reviewer and look at the review comments and try to improve. Yeah, so in my experience, it might be helpful to get a regular award before applying career. That's my suggestion, but it's optional. Finally, when you write a proposal, you want to think about reviewers, right? So as a reviewer, we will write for each in the intellectual merits or broad impact, we will write what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses. So you want the reviewer to write as many strengths as possible, right? So that's why you want to feed the reviewers where to look for your strengths by using bold or italic text to highlight what you want to highlight, like the novelties, impacts, contributions, etc. Yeah, so that's all my slides. So I know I may talk too much. So I will give the floor to Dr. Prakash.
Thank you, Yifei. That's very useful, and I think you touched on some very interesting and useful points. To have a proposal funded before one writes the career proposal can definitely be a big morale boost. Also, having that experience is very useful. So I was at a similar boat as yours. I had a proposal funded before I got my rejection, and sometimes actually for new researchers, it is the hardest thing is getting used to the rejection. Specifically, if your first proposal has been funded, you think, "Oh, life is easy. Anything I write should get funded," and soon reality hits you hard. When after that you have a string of rejections. So it's a kind of a humbling experience, but we all need that reality check from time to time. Also, you mentioned the various resources that OSP offers, and I think we also have templates for data management plan. But of course, any template we get, we need to adapt it to our specific fields. Meaning, if I'm running a computer program and generating data, the management of that data is very different from somebody who's working with human subjects and generating data, right? There are unique privacy and security issues associated with it, so we have to be cognizant of that. So I will get off my soapbox and maybe yield the floor to Faruck, and maybe Faruck can talk about what do you think you should have known at that time? Now in hindsight, you think you could have done a better job. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I also have some slides that I will share, but I want to answer that question first. Mm-hmm. To me, something that was very important that I came to realize later was the idea that even though you have programs and they have their descriptions on what they need, and they want to focus on, the program directors themselves, they might have slightly different priorities. And that's really hard to know just by doing your own research, right? Or by talking to colleagues. So it is important to really talk to the program directors. And I know everyone says that, and I at the beginning kind of hesitated and saying, well, I guess I should first do my homework. But it really helps once you talk to them, because at least you realize what are the things they're not interested, right? And this step, I did talk to them the first time I tried, but it was very superficial. While my second conversation with the program directors was much more involved, and then that's where I could gather more of these priorities, right? So that's something I wish I know, but I guess, yeah, trying it's what you need to do. Right? Keep trying. So yeah, so if you allow me, I will share some slides, very broad points that I want to discuss, and I'm going to try to go a little bit quick so that we give also a chance to Kyle to talk. Let me see. I'm going to try to share my screen. Are you able to see this?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Not
okay.
yet. Sometimes there's a lag, but
okay.
And while you're doing that, I am already seeing some questions come in from people who are participating. So we are not ignoring your questions. Once Faruck has presented and Kyle has also talked, we will take up these questions one after the other. So just be patient.
Do you see my slides or not?
No, not yet.
Okay, somehow, yeah, I'm not. Okay, now finally I see the option. Okay. How about now?
Okay. Yes, we can see them now.
Excellent. Okay. Let me just give you a couple of pointers. one important thing that, especially for those that are applying to more than one agency, for instance, NIH or Department of Defense, it is really important to understand the difference between the goals and programs and the structure of the NSF compared to NIH. Why? Because they are actually different. They have their own priorities, and they want to stress that difference. So if they notice that you know, this grant really fits much better in NIH, they will basically give you a lower score. Right? So that's my first suggestion. The other point that we already mentioned and is the idea that broader impacts are really important. You need to take it seriously and you need to do your work. It is not enough, as we discussed before, it's not enough just to say, well, you know, I teach and teaching is important for dissemination of science, right? You need to think a different way of doing it. So that's something that I noticed, that for them, also innovation in that field is relevant. So they don't want to see the same type of proposals for dissemination. Diversity is important too, but again, I don't think it should be taken as a kind of a token saying, yes, I will do my efforts to include diverse populations of mentees. It should be, as we said before, a smart way of doing it, right? A plan, and also importantly, you need to show progress. At least that helped me. So I show progress. I said I've already tried to do this and this activities, and I have some. Just like we have preliminary results for science, it was useful for me to show preliminary result on this dissemination part. Now for the proposal preparation, I think you really need to do your homework in attending like panels like this. I attended the similar panel before, and to be honest, it was really great. Reading sample proposals are obviously important actions to do, but the NSF also has resources, seminars. Sometimes it's good to get information directly from the source. So I suggest that. Talking to colleagues is very important, and understanding what's the difference between what was expected before versus now. I would say those are important things for preparation. Another point is that NSF cares a lot about fundamental problems. I would claim that they care more about this than straight applications, like in, let's say, curing disease or maybe developing a specific software. It is okay if those are sub-products of your fundamental problem, but the proposal should be framed in such a way that the hypothesis is driven by this problem, problems. Now, 1/3 of the proposal, and this is really true, that 1/3 of your proposal should be about broader impacts and innovation. Some people really leave it as last 2 pages or 1 page, and that's a mistake. I never seen anyone demeriting or giving low scores to a proposal that spent enough time with this impact section. So it's good to know this. I didn't know at the beginning, so that's something I learned. And also importantly is to develop a relationship with the NSF. So we know everything is possible just on our side, on the UTD side. We can talk to the Office of Research, we can read on the web and so on, but really deciding what's the right program for your proposal is important. And for that, you really need to talk to people. That's the part that I said before. You need to talk to them, and they might say, hey, your research is very interesting, but maybe there's another program that has a better fit to yours. And that's something that happened to me. So first I applied to the program, and then after talking to the director, it came to it came the idea that maybe you should try this other program that has these other priorities, and I end up getting the funding from that other program. So that's something you can only get through your relationship with the NSF. Something important too is, let's say if you don't get it the first time, you should always talk to the program director, obviously, before. But if you don't get the proposal, I think it's more important to talk to the program director after it gets rejected, because you can right away at least try to get information about, okay, what are the parts that the panel felt were not appropriate, right? So because you get the reviews, but there's also some extra information, some sort of implicit information about your proposal that sometimes the program directors can share with you. So to me, that was also important to follow up with them. And we said it already several times, but it is very common that you might get rejected, so you should just basically try it, keep trying. I got it in my third attempt, so I used all my strikes. I was kind of helpful because in the second try I got really good comments, but it was probably not yet perfect. So I was at least hopeful that in the next one I would get it, so I did. Okay. And just some final suggestions. This is probably disconnected with NSF. This, in general, works for any proposal. I think as PIs, we need to keep our research program going. It's not a good idea to focus all our efforts to get the funding and then not really strengthen the research in our lab. So, in my opinion, we should keep going, and try to get papers, try to publish, because if you don't get it the first time, at least your record will show up there, and the reviewers do look at your record. It's not that they blindly look only at the proposal. They do check if you have done progress, and that counts. So that's some practical suggestion I have. Another suggestion is, in your proposal, I think it's important to show progress, but you could be a little bit subjective, right? So if you got a cover, if your paper was in a cover, you should mention that, like this research was appearing as a cover story in this journal. Or if you have a paper in a high impact factor, but then you should mention it, even though it's already in the references. It's okay if you mention this explicitly. Okay, and also follow the reviewers' comments. We can always learn from those, and we should also improve based on those. But also, it's important to know that every cycle you have different opinions. So I would not recommend to get too discouraged. If you know that your research idea is important and is innovative, I would not get discouraged too much. I would just try to improve, but don't drop ideas just because the reviewers did not appreciate it at that point, because maybe next cycle someone could see what you're seeing. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you, Faruck. Thank you very much. This is very useful. So what I heard from you, in addition to all the other things you mentioned, is that talking to the program directors is extremely important. And this conversation should happen not just prior to submitting the proposal, but also as a follow-up to the communication of the outcome, whether it is positive or negative. And especially if it's not funded, it's maybe even more important to get the feedback, because sometimes the comments may not truly indicate the sense of the panel, right? And the program director might be able to provide in a one-on-one communication. And I think it's also important that the program directors don't get any joy out of rejecting proposals, right? So to call to complain as to why the proposal wasn't submitted is not the right attitude, right? Because I remember one program director who's a friend once said, the problem is when the proposal gets funded, the PI says it's because my idea is so good. When the proposal doesn't get funded, they say the program director is an idiot. So, so they have to deal with that hostility all the time, right? So if we talk to them with the right approach, trying to understand what we could do better, and as you said, there's no guarantee because the next panel may be completely different, right? The other thing that I have noticed is, and this touches on one of the questions I'll come to later, is of a transformative proposal, especially in the early stages of our career, we make a mistake of confusing quality with quantity. So we cram 50 ideas into one proposal, due to which we are unable to explain even a single one clearly. And then we complain, we had so many great things and they couldn't even find one. So the panel must be composed of buffoons or something like that, right? When it's in reality, we just muddied the whole picture. So yeah, I mean, hindsight, there's a lot to be learned, provided we are willing to learn. So maybe with that, Kyle, we come to you. What do you think in hindsight? What could you have done better, and what could you have changed?
Sure. I think the things I wish I had known mostly come down to reviewer expectations for NSF proposals in general and for the career in particular. So if you don't mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about my earlier proposal and panel experience before submitting to the career as well. So my first proposal was for a 2-year program the NSF was offering to new computer science faculty that has substantially less funding than the career would give, but also even less space to write your description because they just didn't have the expectations you would be doing as much immediately after starting, and that you needed some I guess easier money. And one big mistake I had made on that proposal, which now I understand, is being solid on exactly what your plans are. So Ravi mentioned it's not enough just to have a ton of ideas. One reviewer said, look, you're trying to take on too many things. You've only got 2 years here. You're probably not going to get all of these things done. And by the way, you have all these great problems you're going to try to solve, but you never really went into how you're going to solve them. And it expects some kind of more concrete plan here. So I learned, okay, when I'm writing proposals, I should, try to tune it down a little, figure out exactly what I'm going to work on, explain in detail any preliminary ideas I have, any preliminary results I have. Here's what I've done. Here's exactly how I plan to tackle this. This may not be the final way that I solve these problems, but at least I have a good idea of what's going on. And I learned this when I served on a panel last spring, 2019 as well. My favorite proposals, and I think this is true for most of the panelists, were those that were transformative, whatever that means, had a good idea, were tackling an important problem, but one that could also actually be tackled. Proposals that convinced you that the PI and their team would succeed, either because they had worked in the area before, or they went into detail on how they were going to tackle the problems, which again was my big mistake on my first proposal, or preferably some combination of both. And I'd say you don't have to be afraid to give away too much of the game when you're writing these proposals, even if it's for most of the work in my area is kind of pure mathematics. So knowing the plan is almost the entire battle, but it's still okay to explain most of how you're going to solve your problems. And then finally, one thing I learned for the career in particular, which I think was probably the weakest part of my proposal, even though I was lucky enough to get it funded, there are different expectations in what your broader impact should be between a normal NSF proposal and a career proposal, or at least this is true in the computing division. So most of the proposals I saw in my panel before, the broader impact sections were fairly short. The panelists, they had to be there. You had to say something, but the panelists weren't too concerned. It was enough to say the boilerplate, I'm going to support some students, this work has applications in these areas, etc. But for a career, there's a bigger focus on an education plan. How are you going to integrate education and the research together into something that makes sense? So my idea was, okay, I'm doing theoretical computer science. This mostly involves finding problems people want to solve with a computer, and then doing the math to say, okay, here's how you're going to solve the problem. I'm not actually going to bother to code this for you. I just did the math to show that you can actually solve the problem. It's fine. And a standard broader impact then for theoretical computer science would be, you know what, actually, yeah, I'll code some of the stuff up. I'll hire some students to code it up for me, and I'll put it out there as open source software. So that was my main broader impact for the career. I said, okay, I think some of these algorithms I'm going to design may actually be practical to code up. So I'm going to hire some undergrads. In particular, I'm going to focus on undergrads from minority communities to give them a chance to get into the research process. And as their first experience, I'll let them code some of these algorithms that we're developing. And you know, a lot of the reviewers seemed pretty satisfied with this story, but in my final panel discussion summary, they said, you know, there's no real attempt at outreach. They seem to expect, at least in my program, that not only going to do the standard broader impacts, but you're also going to do things like workshops or teach students that aren't like undergrads yet, like reach out to high schoolers, get them interested in computer science, reach out to undergrads and get them interested in the theory, not just hiring them as researchers. So you should try to understand, and unfortunately it's hard to do this by serving on a panel because you're not on a career panel until you're older, but try to understand specifically what people are looking for in an education plan for the career. One that really should make a difference in the broader computer science community or your own university community or city, as opposed to a standard broader impact. Just applications and hiring students doesn't cut it for the career, especially. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Kyle. So I guess we will now turn over to some of the questions that are being posed. I know that all of you did mention to some extent about talking to program officers. And the whole idea is how do researchers make sure that what's in the proposal is best aligned with what the expectations of the reviewers are, right? And I guess the program officers and program directors are a valuable source because, of course, panelists, you can talk to panelists. You don't even know who the panelists are, but you know the program officers. So the question is to all of you, and feel free to jump in any sequence. Did you contact your program officer? And Faruck, you did mention that you did. And if so, how was the experience? And if not, why didn't you contact them? So anybody?
I can say something. I guess I'm probably the only one who did not contact program officer before my career. After career, I feel like a program officer is pretty nice. But before that, I sent him a couple of emails, but didn't get the response. So I feel like I got discouraged. So I just stopped contacting. Even after my first career rejection, okay, that's a sad story. So I got my rejection on like December 24th. So I feel like it's a holiday. So I didn't get bothered program officer. So, and then after a while, it become new semester. So I got busy. So I forgot about those things. So yeah, I might be a bad example. I didn't contact my program officer. But so on the other hand, I think that it's still okay if you don't contact a program officer.
Okay, all right. Anybody else?
I kind of a similar situation. I served on the panel, and I talked to my program officer for a few minutes after the panel about the appropriateness of my proposal or who I'm aiming it for. I'll be honest, the panel was more valuable to me because I pretty much knew the answers to the questions that I was asking before I got the answers back. I guess so this came up earlier, I guess, submitting to the right program. that is something important that if you don't get a chance to serve on a panel, the program officer should be able to help with. During my panel, we did have a few applications that they were not appropriate for the panel they were in, and it just sunk their chances completely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in my case, so I agree also that if there's no specific questions we have for the program directors, we should not just contact them for the sake of being in touch, right? And because they feel that, they know this, they know that, okay, maybe, I don't know, it's because you're checking a box, you need to contact the. So that's why, in my opinion, it's more beneficial to do it maybe after your first submission, because, okay, if you got it the first time, then that's amazing. If you don't, at least you could have very specific questions to ask, or there's a much more, let's say, back and forth discussion than just saying, this is my idea and tell me if this is appropriate. So I agree that sometimes program officers or program directors are unresponsive. I had that experience at the NIH, where I would not hear back from the program director in months. So it's complicated. So, but if you have a very specific question to ask, they tend to be more responsive because they know there's something they can help you. If it's just let's chat a little bit, then it becomes less useful.
Yeah, so meaning the program directors are not there to be our buddies or our psychiatrists, right? Their time is very valuable. I think that's the most scarce resource, time, right? So the specificity of the question is extremely important. And sometimes, as Kylie mentioned, serving in a panel gives us that idea, right? So as to how people will review our own proposal, how people will look at our own proposal. So that's valuable advice. But for people who are young and new in their career, right? Several of us will not have that experience before we submit a proposal. So that's where, and even before talking to program officers, we have colleagues who've served in these, funding agencies in the past as program directors and other positions. They could also provide similar kind of input, right? Because they've been in that process and they can tell us about it. And then, of course, we should, when we call them, we should be prepared with very specific questions, not something that we can think of off the cuff and then just ask. So, all right. So the next question is, and this is definitely a vexing issue from Shuang Hao. Could the panelists help elaborate a bit on the meaning of transformative ideas? I know that's if we knew, right, then every proposal would be perfect. But and especially if you say, well, if you're going to give me $500,000 and expect my work to transform society, well, that's a big ask, right? So what exactly does it mean to be transformative? Anybody? It's a tough one, right? Meaning it's how do you decide what to present as a transformative idea?
So to me, I'm a little bit more cynical in that sense. The practical way I see it is, especially for young faculty, if you were hired, it means that you were doing something different from a pool of many applicants, right? And sometimes new PIs decide, I want to break completely from what I was doing before, because then otherwise it would seem that this is incremental. But I think that's not a good idea. I think it's, you were doing already something meaningful, and I'm pretty sure there's new ideas that you can explore in that. So, but I don't think transformative would mean doing something completely different to what you were doing before. So my suggestion would be to kind of trust the research program you were hired for, and then just push it and make sure that you understand the literature and things that have been done. But I would not be that bothered with, this idea that it has to change the world the first try.
So it's we should resist the temptation to write a piece of fantasy, right?
Exactly.
Meaning, as researchers, we all know that science or for that matter, any creative process. A lot of creative processes are by their very nature incremental, right? We build upon things that very smart and very hardworking people before us have already built, right? So you build on top of what has already been built. And so in that nature, to some extent, science and exploration and research is an iterative process, an incremental process, right? To feel that we can just transform the field in 3 years or 5 years of research is a little too, I would say, self-serving and maybe immodest idea. At the same time, I also understand that there's a political aspect to it as well, and we have to say that every taxpayer dollar is going to go into this area and it's going to be transformative, and you're going to get a big bang for the buck. So that's a very tough question, Shuanghao. What is transformative ideas? But definitely creative and transformative perhaps could be used synonymously here, meaning if there is an assumption that is no longer valid because something has happened in your field and everybody else is just making that same assumption, well, maybe drawing attention to that and how that changes the problems is transformative. Because if you are the first one to see that, then maybe you're the first one to innovate. So that kind of stuff, right? Somewhere the mold is being broken and out comes something new. So maybe that kind of creative and original thinking would hopefully lead us towards transformative ideas. So if anybody has anything else to add, otherwise I will move on to the next question, which is submitted by an anonymous participant. It says, tell me how you synthesized your educational component with your research plan. I know some of you already talked about it, but maybe if you want to go into a little more detail.
I can start. My research is about mathematical modeling in data science. And then part of my education plan is I try to collaborate with industry so that to collecting more data. And then so this where I brought up this internship. So I can, by collaborating with those collaborators in industry, I can send my student to internship. So this is like student supervision. And then by have students working with the industry, I can also improve my research as well. So there may be some problem I didn't realize myself, but sending student, by student closely working with industry people, I can realize something. So this is how I integrate my research to education. Yeah.
Faruck and Kyle, do you, either of you want to add anything more to it? Faruck? Yeah, Kyle?
So I think I said the main thing was hiring undergrads, particularly minority students, to get their feet wet in the research process by doing implementations of the algorithms. So I felt this was a nice combination of making the thing I'm doing more practical and have broader impacts while also educating in the process. Another thing I did, which is also kind of nice at the broader impact in general, is I'm going to integrating some of the things I'm working on into new classroom curricula. So I think there was a slide earlier that said, like, our job is to teach. So you can't just say, I'm going to teach classes. That doesn't count. But it is okay to say, look, I'm going to develop a course on this subject. And in particular, I'm going to try to devote some time to this subfield upon which I'm doing my research. That's fine. I wouldn't devote the entirety of your education plan to that, because that's kind of almost the path of least resistance, I would say. But it's fine to include that in addition to other things.
Okay. All right. So maybe move on to the next question, which is, how did you become part of a review panel? How did you get the invitation? Either of you.
I emailed a program director and said, if you need anybody to review for you, I'd be happy to help.
Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure the review the program director was very happy to receive that, because it's usually quite tough to populate a good review panel. Faruck, how did you get your first invitation?
Yeah, actually, this is very interesting, because I have not done any panel review before, but I think that was mostly it's my fault, because I had this assumption, wrong assumption, that in order to be a reviewer, you needed to have already some grants accepted. So I never even asked for this, because I thought until I get the experience, then I should get in there. Then I realized that's not true, and it was kind of a mistake also from my side, because all my colleagues said that that's where they have learned the most, by participating in this panels, but I haven't done it. So I probably will start sending messages to program directors, but I haven't had experience.
Okay, Yifei, how did you get onto your first review panel? I think your mic is muted.
Yeah, so as I said, the program officer tell me that not submitting regular grant, and then a few months later, he said, "Oh, since you got your career, you were not submitting, we will ask you to serve on panel."
Mm-hmm. So basically, yeah, once you have a proposal funded, you get on the list, right? And then when program directors are looking for reviewers, so this is a chicken and egg problem, right? For somebody who's starting out, how do you do it, right? And as Kyle said, volunteering is meaning, what's the worst they can do? Not invite you, right? But volunteering is very helpful. And second, I guess, you meet people in conferences. They know of your work, right? Through your scholarship, if you get recognized, they might call you. So, and this is, with conflict of interest, lots of people are ruled out anyway from serving in panels. So there's always a need for people who are up to date on their respective area and who can provide objective reviews. So I guess you need to ask, and maybe you need to get visible. So, so the next question is, what are the most common issues you see with an application, with a proposal?
I think I mentioned a lot in my slide, so I guess I will be quiet this time.
Okay, all right. Faruck and Kyle, any common issues that you saw? I guess, Kyle, maybe I'll pick on you. So you've been in a panel. Faruck has not been in a panel. So was there something common, maybe a common mistake that pretty much every or most of the proposals that were not deemed competitive were making?
I think one common mistake maybe helps to answer the transformative question. A lot of people would take problem or set of problems they worked on before, and it's fine to continue working in the same subfield. It's kind of necessary so that you've established, but taking what's old and making it just a teeny bit better than before is not terribly interesting, especially when it was somewhat of a niche subject to begin with. Like, that does not excite panelists, unfortunately. Another thing that I saw, which I personally was kind of negative on, was someone working on a problem for which they had almost no experience, and they provided relatively little information in the proposal about how they were actually going to succeed. It doesn't matter how established you are, even a senior researcher, if they're completely switching to a new problem and they don't have work in it and they don't have an explanation for why they're the one to succeed, there's going to be this assumption that they're not going to be the one to succeed.
So the sense of entitlement that just because I'm famous and I'm well established, you should give me money. That doesn't work, right? You have to show that. Even in a core program, that doesn't work. And you have to prove yourself. It's in a way, if everything was working ideally, this would be a memoryless system. Your proposal is judged solely on what's in the proposal, right? And you may have had a very successful track record before that, but you should not go in assuming that then improves this chance. At the same time, you may have had a string of rejections, but that does not mean that the chances of this one getting funded are lowered just because of that. If it's a badly written proposal, yes, of course, the chances are low. But if you've been consistently working to refine it and improve it, your past failures don't really hurt you in the review of this proposal, right? Okay. So there's a question from Enrica Ziller. Did any of the panelists work with the UTeach Dallas? How was the experience? I think Yifei, you mentioned you did, right?
Yeah, I just mentioned it in my proposal. I didn't haven't started working with them yet, so I feel sorry.
So you're planning to. You're planning to work with them. Okay.
Yeah, so their building is just next to our building, so it's pretty close to. Oh, it's just upstairs, so it's pretty close. Just give them a visit. But it's still hard actually to integrate university level material to high school and middle school. So I'm still working on it. Yeah.
You're meaning, I think, and before I come to Faruck and Kyle, maybe the reason why that is a very useful tool is, as we know, in all the scientific fields, it's when we get PhD students in our labs, that's near the end of that educational pipeline, right? The biggest problem is the pipeline is running dry, or there's a fear of the pipeline running dry. So programs like UTeach, which improve the quality of high school and middle school science education, are vital to the pipeline staying healthy and so that is why perhaps those kinds of programs are really important, because our future PhD students will come from good high school and middle school science students, right?
Yeah, and I guess also for NSF, it is really important that they see that there's an established resource from the university, because that also means continuity, right? Even if maybe one grant is done, there's this established resource that other people at the university can use. So they like that. And I agree. There's experience that the PI doesn't have to do everything itself and benefit more.
I mean, we are fortunate that at UT Dallas we have a resource like this. Several universities do not have that, and I can say from my own experience, when I came to UT Dallas, it wasn't there, and it could have helped me tremendously at that time. And so for colleagues who are right now looking at these programs, definitely use this, and don't use it just to make your proposal look nice. Use it because it serves a very important purpose, right? For the long-term health of our own fields. Unless we have good teachers teaching in high schools, we won't get good grad students. So, all right. So there's a question from Jennifer G. Says, as a new graduate student who wishes to pursue teaching in higher education and research, how important is funding and grants to your career? Not at all, right? So how do you want to answer this question? How important is it to the continuation of your career? Meaning, of course, I guess tenure is one little thing that we can't ignore as the first pressing matter. But beyond tenure, just funding and research.
So in my department, we have two different tracks. We have this tenure track, right? It's more research oriented, and then we also have what we call a clinical track. So clinical track is more like a teaching oriented position. So it's like a senior lecturer. And then so if you want to pursue this clinical track, then pretty much all your profile is built up on your teaching experience. So as long as you have good teaching student evaluation, that you will be good. Occasionally, if it's not satisfied, if you are not satisfied, you can keep proposing something that helps with education. So I know in our department, John Zwag and Sun Minkov, they have a grant to use 3D printer to help teach calculus. So this could be a new pathology approaches that may help with education, and also they are research-oriented faculty. So it's a combination. But I would say that grants are not important for teaching jobs. It's just optional, right? Better to have it, but not a must. But it's a must for tenure track.
Okay, Faruck and Kyle.
Yeah, I agree. So funding and grants is as important as teaching and your papers, right? And I don't remember when I had a conversation about the importance of having outputs, but obviously also inputs, right? So you want your research program to have lots of products, but you also need inputs to make them better. So having the support from research agencies is completely vital. Now, maybe a more useful answer, because she's a grad student, a new grad student, would be to say, the earlier you get experience learning how to get or propose ideas, the better, because that's something that is not so easy to get while you're doing your thesis, while you're a postdoc. It's not easy because you want to get outputs only. You don't want to focus too much on inputs, but let's say if you have chances to apply for fellowships or scholarships, and those require a skill very similar to the one getting grants. So knowing that it is fundamental, I think starting early, applying to all these, fellowships or even mini grants, even travel grants, it's a really, really important activity that you should start doing if you have a chance. It should not be overwhelming. It should not be the priority, but if you can start early, it gets better in the future.
Kyle, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I would reiterate that. That is one thing I wish I had a little more formal training on, was the grant process, because I applied for a couple postdoc fellowships, and the most important part of the experience there was just learning to navigate Fastlane. I didn't really get a proper training on what the panels are actually like. I didn't get meaningful feedback from the applications themselves. So that first grant was kind of, okay, I have a couple samples. Here's what I think. Here's how I think the process works. And then again, the panel is valuable. But one thing to keep in mind with grants is if you're going in your tenure track position, they do look explicitly at the grants you've applied for and the grants you've received as evidence that you will continue to apply for and receive grants, and that your research program will dry up after tenure. So you need to be putting in effort to be sustainable and show that you're putting in that effort. And then also, you need this grant money to support your students. If you don't have grant money, then at best you're going to get a student who is willing to TA all the time, and now their time's being taken up with teaching instead of doing research. And you're probably not going to get too many students who are terribly excited to go into a research program and not have time to do their research.
So it's a matter of getting the sufficient resources to keep your program going, right? And then I believe, depending on the discipline, right, the need for grants and the amount of grant funding you require to run a viable program can also be very different, right? If say the work is very theoretical, and assuming in an ideal situation one can just do it on their own, right? And one is productive enough to do that, possibly. But then, or if let's say your work requires writing simulations, then maybe a student or two and some small equipment is fine. But if you're working with, say, animals, or you're working with chemicals, you need specialized lab equipment. And the university can only go so much or so far in providing that equipment or that support to you. Then and the university may actually give you a startup money. And so, Jennifer, I don't know which field you are in, but the university typically would promise you some startup money to get you started as a faculty member on tenure track. But the expectation is that is to get you started. And then, and the university typically want you to succeed when they hire you, right? So just like program officers don't get any pleasure out of denying proposals, senior faculty don't get any pleasure out of denying tenure, right? When we hire people, we want them to succeed. But then it's your job as well to create the environment for your own success, right? So the startup funds will help you for the first couple of years, maybe will support a student or two. But then beyond that, this is what continues to provide some, I would say, nourishment to our research program and to our laboratories and groups and so on and so forth. So depending on your field, the urgency and the volume of grants can vary. But to some extent, yes, it's always a good thing to have. And in some cases, it's essential to have. Anybody wants to add to that?
I'd say actually one benefit beyond just the money and the resources is if you're in an area, so in theoretical computer science, we're not quite as reliant on grant money as in other parts of computer science maybe, but it is nice to, during the grant writing process, to have a chance to reflect, what is it I'm trying to do? Yeah. What's the bigger picture here? What specific things should I be doing? And writing the grant forces you to make those plans and know where you're going from your current station.
Yes. It basically provides that discipline, right? You have to think in a very disciplined manner, something that we would otherwise just take for granted, right? You know, here's an idea bouncing in my head, but now I have to sit down and write it in a manner that it makes sense to others. In the process, sometimes we clarify our own thinking, and that can be very beneficial. So that exercise is very useful. We are at 3:20, and this panel is supposed to go all the way up to 3:30. And I am trying to see if there is any other question. I don't see any other question visible to me. After Jennifer G's question. So I presume there are no questions. So maybe we can start winding up. I guess, you know, it's been great talking to all three of you. You provided valuable insight. And I'm pretty sure, first of all, I wish great success to all three of you. And I'm pretty sure you will continue to do good work and write proposals and get funding. But anything else that we have not touched upon in the process of that could be of great use to our colleagues who are in the early stages of their career in terms of funding and even otherwise, so that they are successful in their research? Anybody has any thoughts or anything that you are yourself trying to do that you don't mind sharing with others? Now that you have your career grant, what do you do with it?
And I have just a couple of comments. Well, we've been talking about, okay, how you kind of narrow your ideas, how to synthesize your educational goals, and the idea that, well, at least I've heard that the career specifically wants you to at least pose hypothesis-driven proposals rather than just ideas. But something that maybe it's also important to consider, and we did not talk too much because we assume it was maybe obvious, but the idea of the funding you request. So it is also important to know exactly how much funds you need for something. I can tell you by experience because I was lucky, I guess, because I proposed some things that later I realized that probably I didn't request enough funds for that. And actually the program director was, I don't know, generous enough to say, hey, we think that we really like what you're proposing, but probably you did not ask for enough resources. And I was so happy because they allowed me to change this. But then in retrospect, I thought, what if they wouldn't have done it? And then ultimately, I could not have achieved what I proposed. So that's another part that is really important, and people need to care about that. And that's also not easy to know if you have not experienced getting money, right?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah. So the one risk is over-promising, right? And not budgeting enough, because so the thing is, often what happens is that our proposal may be approved for funding, but not necessarily at the level we requested, right? And then we have this discussion with the program director, a program manager, saying, well, you asked for X dollars, but we can only give you X minus delta. And as a young researcher, as a new researcher, full of fire and vigor and idealism, we say, all right, fine, we'll do all that work in X minus delta, right? Which is a mistake. We cannot do all that work in less funding, right? So we have to, and typically it comes with a request to revise the abstract, revise the deliverables, right? And we have to be realistic there, right? We have to realize that we cannot do everything that we promised. perhaps as it is with the full budgeting, we couldn't have done everything that we promised, and now we can definitely not do everything. So that skill, and it's an acquired skill, it comes with experience to realize what can and what cannot be done, right? Initially, in an early stage of our career, we think we can do everything. And it takes time for us to realize that we cannot do everything, right? There is so much we can do, and that realization of what we can do and working within what we can do, right, within our limitations, is also a very important tool towards success. Because otherwise, we'll just keep on taking things that we cannot do and keep on failing. That's not the recipe for long-term success. So setting the right target and then working towards it. Anything else?
So I just want to add one comment that, so after serving on panel, I know that, so as a reviewer, we will list your strengths and weaknesses, right? So when you're writing a proposal, you try to make sure that they can list more strengths than weakness so that they can give you competitive rating. So just keeping that in mind. And then you want to make sure that the reviewer will find your strengths easily. So don't hide in some text. Make it bullets, make it highlighted. Yeah, just make your proposal easier to read from reviewer's perspective.
So continuing in the vein of the fact that the reviewer is an evil person, which lots of us tend to think every once in a while, reviewers sometimes find it very hard to find the strengths of our proposals, but they very easily find all the weaknesses of our proposal.
Right.
So I guess a proposal is only as good as its weakest part, maybe, because what has happened, what I've seen in panels is, and this is where, once again, don't try to put too many things, because you will not be able to present every one of them in a convincing manner, is if there are too many things in a panel, somebody will latch on to the weakest or least developed part of the proposal. And then that tends to become the focus of the discussion when your proposal comes up for discussion. And all the strengths somehow get ignored. And then that's the kiss of death for that proposal, right? So you would rather put two solid ideas than the same two solid ideas with one weak idea. If the third one cannot be as solid as the first two, don't go with that third one, because nobody's going to fund your proposal for how many ideas you have, right? Just because you have many ideas. So that temptation, right, has to be avoided.
Yeah, so if you have two solid ideas and you still want to write something, you can write about the management plan, you can write a research plan, timeline, student involvement, and then border impacts, right? So focus on those things rather than have a 1 week point.
Yes.
I will say something to that, though. So my proposal was I'm going to work on something for a few years to develop tools to then solve more problems, because this is supposed to be a 5-year plan. You don't want something that looks like you're going to finish too early. And so I was very clear up front in the introduction, like, look, my proposal can kind of be chunked up into 3 parts here, and naturally the parts that come later, they cannot be as developed yet, because I don't know what the world's going to be like in 4 years. I can make guesses on what I will be working on then, but who knows? Other people may have already solved these. Maybe something fantastic would come out of my lab or somewhere else that I want to use. So naturally, part 3 is less developed, and I didn't get a single complaint about that. In fact, I kind of almost had the opposite, where they focused purely on part 1 in my reviews, which I thought was a little strange.
Yeah, really, I think that's very honest of you to say that, right? And we all know that you cannot predict. Well, 2 months back, we couldn't predict that we would be here in this setting talking about this kind of stuff, right? So, but as long as, I guess, the panel sees that the PI is self-aware, right? And of the things that can be predicted, they have a solid plan, then I think that's fine. Because otherwise, if you've already figured everything out, then why write the proposal? The problem is solved anyway, right? So, okay, we are near the end. So, if any parting thoughts, any advice to our colleagues and students, graduate students who are on this
I guess I had one thing to reiterate is do make it easy for the reviewers to find, like Eva said, help them find the strings. One thing I like to do is that maybe this works better for like mathematics, but I like to make a numbered problems. So I describe the background. I say problem 1, can this be done? Blah, blah, blah. Problem 2, can this be done? It's in its own little box with the actual number 1 or number 2 or number 3 before it. It's very clear specifically what I'm going to do. The reviewer does not have to think at all to understand what the goal is.
Okay. Yifei and Faruck, anything else to add?
I think it's working hard and good luck.
Okay.
Same thing. Don't get discouraged. Keep trying.
Yeah. So let me thank all of you. It's been a delight talking to the three of you. It's been absolute pleasure. And in this time, right, when we are all at home and we're all stay-at-home teachers as well, homeschooling our kids, and also keeping our research going on. And I also realize that this is the last week of the semester, and all of you are under pressure to deliver all your grades because students need to decide on their credit, non-credit, pass, non-pass choices, pass-fail choices as well by the 30th. So it's every minute of your time is precious, and the fact that you devoted 90 minutes here and several more minutes before this in preparation is time that you could ill afford. So I really thank you, and on behalf of the VP of Research and everybody in the Office of Research, we are extremely thankful for the time. I hope that the participants got something out of it, and people who attended the session. Also, for people who attended the session, we thank you for joining us and for your questions. And these were very useful. And by asking these questions, you've also helped others, because I'm sure others have the same questions as well. And finally, to all the staff who helped steer this and organize this. Thank you to all of you for making this happen. And with that, we are at 3:31 and it's time to close. So thank you and goodbye.
Thanks for moderating.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.